And just tell us a little bit about the mechanics of that. So you've got the content.
Mm-hmm.
What was that process like of going, okay, well, if we had to do it online, which we now do, how do you move from content that you're so used to delivering in person, in a room with people? How do you translate that online? Because you can't do it the same way, can you?
No, absolutely not. And I think it comes back to kind of getting to grips with like, well, what's the transformation we're trying to do here? What's the impact? What we're trying to help people with? And then how do we do that? So rather than kind of go, well, what's the technology like and how do we just transfer it from face to face to to online? It's more like what's the experience we want people to have. So what that led us to was, for our full day session, it wasn't really a question of how do we keep people engaged for a whole day and staring at a screen, because that would just be like hell. That would be torture. But if we start to think about, okay, so what we're helping people with really is getting clarity, getting out of overwhelm, and getting to grips with their workload, but also setting up this, what we call a second brain system. So if they've got a whole day dedicated to that, and we can come alongside them to help them to put that in place, then actually that's not making them sit and stare at a screen for a day. That's actually, so what we started saying is, let's think of it less like an online training session for a full day. Let's think of it more like having a productivity ninja at your kitchen table next to you, helping you to get good systems set up, helping you to get your inbox to zero, helping you to get this second brain up and running. And then, then from that perspective, we, have the end in mind. Then we were able to go, okay, so we've got these building blocks of content. What's the best way of distributing that? And instead of maybe having like a chunk of content and then a little group exercise, it was then more like, okay, can we send people off to do that bit there and then get them to come back? Can we give them a time frame to do that or to play around with that and then come back? And then as soon as you start thinking from that perspective of like, what's the impact we want to have or what's the experience, you can then start to play with, well, what constraints, or what extra things do people have at home that they don't have when they're in a training room and a training session.
There are constraints, of course, that you don't choose. So, for example, here we are all working from home. We didn't choose this, but how can you, when you sort of feel constrained by something, what's a good way to respond, do you think, to tap into that creativity?
Yeah, so I think, whenever you find yourself feeling like, oh, I can't do that because,
right.
It's, there are a couple of ways you shift that, right? You can shift it into, well, I can if. So we can't do online training, or we can't, do that kind of experiential online training in the way that we could face-to-face. So to give you an example, our inbox to zero training, the reason why it works so well is because we don't just talk about it. We actually get people doing it in the session. And normally we can go from desk to desk and look over people's shoulders and go, no, don't do that. Or you see this here, let me show you how to select all and delete. Or let me show you how to do this really cool thing in Outlook. And that comes from the interaction of being able to see what's going on for them and then being able to give that advice in real time. Now, if I go, well, I can't do that because I can't be in the same room as them, the thing to think about then is like, okay, I can if. So how could I, what would I need to do? What would I need to have in order to be able to do something like that? So it's like, well, if I can see their screen, then I can do something. Then the other constraint is, nobody's going to want to share their screen in an online training session where there might be confidential stuff and other people looking at their inbox. It's like, okay, what if I can get them to share their screen individually? And that's where Zoom breakout rooms comes in. So the technology does help, but if you look at it from a what do I want it to do perspective first, then get the tool to serve me, then you can find out what's possible with the tool. But the other way is also go, well, what do I have in my hand? So what do I have and what can I do with that? So when you said earlier about publishing isn't actually about printing things on dead wood, the thing that came to my mind was a beautiful open letter that I saw that the events industry wrote to the NHS. And by saying, okay, our work's all dried up right now, but what we have is we're really good at transforming spaces. We're really good at the logistics of making lots of things, all these complex things happening together. Like, I think you might need us. So, I don't know this for sure, but I'd love to think that the events industry had a hand in transforming Excel into NHS Nightingale. And so, thinking about like, what do I have? What are my strengths? And how can I repurpose that to still be of use? Can be a really great way of thinking, I guess, unconventionally. So a good phrase that I like to use is "I get to." So if you're thinking, oh gosh, I have to work from home, we have to stay indoors, we have to, all these kind of things, it can feel constraining, it can feel like an obligation, it can feel heavy. But if you start switching that around to "I get to," it gets your brain thinking about opportunities. It gets your brain thinking about things you're grateful for and things you're appreciating. So a little phrase I've been using in our workshops is, if I have to work from home, that means I get to. And then you fill in the blanks. The beauty, I think, of the disruption is you can see this as a season to experiment. And you can go, well, I'm not sure I want to do that continuing from here, or that you would even work, but let's see it as a season. Let's kind of go, well, let's try this for the next 3 weeks, see what happens. And I have full permission to bin it if I don't like it. So I can walk away from it. And that gives you some freedom, I think, around constraints, weirdly enough.
Yes, and it ties in what you said earlier, which really struck me, is that this is a time when people are much more tolerant of imperfection. Yeah. So that really is it today. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Grace, on behalf of all of us. And I hope to see you back here next week for another Practical Inspiration webinar. See you then.
Thanks very much, Alison.